there will be computations. So let me just inform everybody na no, this afternoon that you will be needing your calculators come your midterms exam. Um, Definitely there will still be choices, no? Pero yun nga lang, of course, the choices will be very, very confusing, especially with computations. Yung tipong lahat pwede. Diba? Yeah. So, in order for us to understand what epidemiology is, it is very important for us to define some important terms. So, if you still remember from our last discussion, we defined epidemiology as the application of demography to medicine. So, it was a branch of medicine which studies the incidence, distribution of diseases in order to improve a community's health. So basically, that definition is still the same with this definition that I gave here. It is the study of the distribution and the determinants of health-related states or events in a certain population and the application of that mathematical study to control health problems. Okay? So basically, in epidemiology, we will study numbers and apply that to improve a population or a community's health status. Actually, epidemiology comes from a Greek word which, when translated, literally means the study of that which is upon the people. So basically, when we say epidemiology, we study diseases, health related states that are already with the people. No? So how does epidemiology help us improve health states? So ganito po. The functions of epidemiology is like this. Number one, we first should have a health event in a community that we want to limit. Okay? So, pipili tayo ng problem in the community that we want to limit the undesirable numbers. We want to control this type of disease. After choosing that, we then describe the distribution and determinants of this health event that we want to control. Hindi ko pala nakopya yung ano no, yung ano ko example ko. Sige, anyway. And then after determining the distribution and determinants, we then create new approaches to prevent, control, and treat this disease. Afterwards, after natin maglabas ng program to prevent, control, and treat the disease, we will measure how much knowledge did the people gain about how the disease begins and spread throughout the population. So let me just pull out my example ha. I was not able to include it pala in the slides. For a while po. For a while lang ha. Let me just pull out my example for this para maintindihan niyo. Ayan, forgive me medyo mabagal yung internet ko kanina. And there you go. So here is my example in order for you to understand how epidemiology helps us control certain diseases or health-related events. Okay, so let's say we want to limit undesirable health events in a community, and our chosen disease is the number of heart attack deaths in Barangay Kalusugan, Quezon City. So let's say that that is our target. We want to decrease the number of people dying from heart attack in Barangay Kalusugan, Quezon City. So what's next? After determining our goal, we should describe the distribution and determinants of health-related events. So we want to determine sino ba yung namamatay from heart attack? What age group is it more commonly seen? Sa 15 to 40 years old ba siya? Sa 40 to 50 years old ba siya? 50 to 60? 60 and above? So we want to determine the distribution of the disease. So age group. Is it more common among males or females? So bibilangin natin ilan ba yung namatay sa heart attack. Is it more females? Is it more males? So we'll count it off. Also, we'll determine the risk factors. Did those people who died from heart attack, are they cigarette smokers? Are they alcohol drinkers? Are they people who tried illicit drugs or illegal drugs? We also want to determine the factor of SES or socio-economic status. Are those people who are dying from heart attacks, do they come from rich um, rich families? Do they come from poor families? And even education. So basically, this is already the application of your epidemiology. Determining who are the most vulnerable, what are the factors which contribute to these health events. And then after knowing, so let's say for heart attack, no, we we discovered that it is more common among 60 years old and above males. Risk factors are cigarette smoking and alcohol intake. So we will create now a program which will address that age group, that gender, and the risk factors that they have. So let's say we created a program called Healthy Heart Program. So we will teach them about proper diet, proper exercise, regular checkup, and we will even teach them the early signs of heart attack so that when they feel or when they start to see these symptoms, they can immediately go to the hospital. So let's say that the program will run for 3 months. After 3 months, we will check if the information stuck and if the people learned. So how will we check? We will do another epidemiologic study. So we can actually give these people an examination to check if they really learned something from the lectures that we gave. We can also even do checking of their ECG, ng kanilang heart, to check if their heart improved after learning about the Healthy Heart Program. So basically, this is how, through these practices, this is how epidemiologists contribute to our knowledge of how diseases begin and spread, and how they can be prevented, controlled, and even treated. Okay? So, any questions here in the functions of epidemiology? None so far. All right. So, how did epidemiology begin? It began in 1849 when cholera became an epidemic in London. So, the symptoms of cholera include diarrhea, vomiting, leading to severe dehydration. So, patients or people who got infected with cholera, they would continuously have diarrhea, vomiting, and other symptoms, and they would not want to eat. Mawalan sila ng appetite. So it will lead to dehydration, and worse, it can lead to shock. So what is shock ba? Shock is severe dehydration to the point that the body cannot compensate anymore. The body cannot compensate anymore to the water loss of the body. So how did they battle cholera? A prominent physician by the name of John Snow, whose picture you see at the bottom here, investigated the outbreak. And how did he do it? Through epidemiology. He interviewed families and victims about their symptoms, what happened, etc. And so, he looked at the distribution of the cases. So he made a map of his community, and those in red are the households with cholera patients. And he noticed that there are more cholera cases in this street compared to other streets. Do you see this? No, mas marami dito sa street na to. And so, he was able to conclude that the source of the cholera epidemic was probably water taken from a communal well located in this street. That's why people in living along that street had a lot of cases because they were drinking water from a common source. And even those other neighbors would get water from that well. So sila yung nai-infect. So what did he do? He removed the handle from the well, forcing people to get water elsewhere, and then the epidemic of cholera ended. Because of this, John Snow is considered, remember this, as the father of epidemiology. Now, there are different types of epidemiological studies. We have descriptive, analytic, and even experimental. So we will discuss them one by one. When we say descriptive epidemiology, it is the study of the occurrence and distribution of disease. Basically, it answers the basic questions of what, who, where, and when. Okay? It answers the basic questions of what, who, where, and when. So here is an example of a descriptive epidemiology. This data that you see at the bottom is an example of descriptive epidemiology. Let's start on the left. It says here number of patients hospitalized. So basically, it tells us how many people got hospitalized for a certain disease in 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018. And we can see from this data that there are more people who got hospitalized in 2018 compared to other years. Now on the right, we see now what disease is being counted. It is dengue. So it answers the questions what. And then it also tells us that the report came from 2014 to 2018, answering the question when. Okay, so we can see here that there is usually an increase in dengue cases around the month of June, July, and August. But by the time of October or September, it would start to go down. No? However, in 2018, there was a continuous increase in cases by August. So instead of it going down, in August, more cases were counted, and even in September. So this is a study telling us, what is this again about? Dengue outbreak. When? 2014 to 2018. Where? So let's say a data would put here from Barangay Tatalon. Okay? So when it just answers or tells us how many cases there are, what is the distribution of the disease, it is a descriptive epidemiology. Analytic epidemiology, on the other hand, answers the basic question of why. Okay? It answers the question why. So, when you perform further studies to determine the validity of the hypothesis concerning the occurrence of the disease, it's already considered analytic. So let's take that example earlier, this one. So we want to answer the question, why did the cases increase in August and September? Why did it happen? So if you want to answer that, that's already analytic epidemiology. And based on that data, they were able to find out, guys, that children ages 8 to 16 tend to play on the lake or on the river near Barangay Tatalon. That's why this river became a breeding ground for mosquitoes, leading to more dengue cases. Okay, that's what they found out. And then lastly, we have experimental epidemiology, wherein we deliberately manipulate the cause of a disease to determine if there will be a change in its effect. So we want to determine if the cause and effect are really connected and it's not due to chance. Okay? Ganun po siya. We want to determine if the cause and the effect are truly related and not just simply due to chance. So that's experimental. So here we have the HIV/AIDS registry of the Philippines. So can somebody tell me, figure 1, is this analytic, descriptive, or experimental? Yes, Ms. Castillo?
Descriptive po.
Why do you say so?
Because it answers po yung question when and tsaka po yung number po
Puro numbers, no?
the designated cases.
Thank you so much. That's correct, no? So here we can see that it just gave us the distribution and occurrence of the disease. It tells us from 2016 to 2018 how many people were being diagnosed with HIV/AIDS per month. And we can see that in 2018, which is represented by this dark green, there was an increase in January as compared to January of the previous years. No? So dumami daw yung na-diagnose ng HIV/AIDS noong January 2018. So this is just it just shows us distribution and occurrence. So correct, this is a descriptive epidemiology. How about in figure 2? In figure 2, this can be descriptive and analytic. Diba? Descriptive because it tells us the distribution, why ano yung numbers, no, per cause. But it also answers the question, why? Why was there an increase in the cases in January? And it tells us because males having sex with males ang main cause. Okay? And then it gave us a distribution. Okay? Ayan po. So, in every epidemiologic study, okay, remember, in every epidemiologic study, the epidemiologic triangle should be present. What do we mean by that? In other words, for every disease, there is an epidemiologic triangle, which consists of 3 factors: your host, your agent, and your environment. Kindly remember that, for every disease, there is always a host, an agent, and environment. So we can see here 2 models of the epidemiologic triangle. The first model shows us triangle lang siya, di ba? So this means that there is equal influence between host, agent, and environment in the development of a disease. So, wala sa kanilang mas mahalaga. All of them are equal in its influence in the development of a disease. But in the second model, as you can see here, this shows that agent and host are variables, meaning they are dependent on each other. Diba? Kung malakas yung host, pwedeng walang disease na mangyayari. Kung mahina yung agent, pwedeng walang disease na mangyayari. So they are dependent on each other. Okay? So here is the accepted model as of now. Triangle pa rin, host, agent, environment, and now we have the vector. So the example given here is lung cancer. Okay? So, lung cancer daw. Sino yung host? Siyempre, yung patient who developed lung cancer. Okay? Ano yung agent natin? Ano ba yung nagdala ng lung cancer sa kanya? Cigarettes. Okay? Cigarettes. How did the cigarette reach the host? Through vectors. Who are the vectors? The manufacturers, the distributors, the vendors of cigarettes. And then, add to that the environment. Your air policy, peer pressure, advertising, etc. So later on, puntahan natin to. Let's define some terms first. Host. The host is usually the human who gets the disease. Okay? So whoever gets the disease, that is the host. So there are different factors that are intrinsic. Ibig sabihin ng intrinsic, natural sa host. No? There are factors which are naturally found in the host, which is called risk factors. And risk factors influence their exposure, susceptibility, and response to a disease-causing agent, such as age, sex, race, genes, immunity, occupation, and previous diseases. So what do I mean by this? There are diseases that are more commonly found in children compared to adults. So in that sense, age becomes a risk factor. If you are younger, then you are more susceptible to getting that kind of disease. And also, there are diseases which are more commonly found in the elderly. Diba? Like hypertension. Hindi mo naman nakikita ang high blood sa mga bata. Nakikita natin yan sa matatanda. So, because of that, age puts a person at a more likelihood or more chances of developing high blood or hypertension. Diba? Sex. There are diseases which are more commonly found in males than females and vice versa. Like breast cancer, more commonly found in females than males. Diba? So their gender or sex puts them at risk of developing a certain disease. And so on. So your immune status, the kind of work that you do, and other diseases that you had can all play a factor into the development of a disease. Like kunwari, doctors. Anong mga sakit yung more common na ma-achieve, makuha ng doctors? Of course, infectious diseases like COVID-19, diba? Because we are always in the hospitals. Or let's say, electrocution. Do you think doctors can get electrocuted? No, we expect that from linemen, from electrical workers, electrical engineers, diba? So, yun yung ibig sabihin natin by risk factors. Now, there is also what we call host resistance. What is host resistance? Host resistance naman are a person's protective barriers against a disease. Diba? So, let's say, somebody enters the classroom and that person has COVID-19. Not everyone in the room will get COVID. Why? Because some of us have good nutritional status. While some, hindi masyadong okay ang nutrition. So they may be more prone to get COVID. Some of us, we have good immune system. Complete vaccination. But for some, probably incomplete vaccination. So, host resistance plays a factor into developing a protection against diseases. Okay? So that is host. Next, we have agent. Agent usually refers to an infectious microorganism or pathogen. So this can be a virus, a bacteria, a parasite, or other microbes which can cause disease. Okay? So let's say, for tuberculosis, what is the agent? Of course, yung bacteria that causes tuberculosis, diba? Siya yung disease-causing agent. Now, agent can also be anything that cause illness to the host. So, hindi necessary na microorganism. Pwedeng, yes, biologic agents such as microorganisms, but it can also be chemical agents. Diba? There are chemicals which can cause diseases if you get exposed to it. It can also be physical agents, diba? Such as accidents. Ayan, diba? So generally, the agent must be present for a disease to occur or for an injury to occur. But the presence of the agent alone is not always sufficient to cause disease. Diba? Koch's postulate, remember? The agent must be present for a disease to occur. But the presence of an agent is not sufficient to cause disease. So ano example nun? COVID-19 again, diba? So kunwari, somebody enters the room and they have COVID. Not all of us will develop COVID. Why? Because meron tayong host resistance. Diba? So, yes, an agent can be present, but it does not necessarily mean that we will develop the disease. Diba? And then lastly, environment. These are extrinsic factors that affect the agent and the opportunity for exposure. So when we say environment, this includes different factors such as geology and climate, biologic factors, like dengue, di ba? Dengue is caused by a virus. So the dengue virus is the agent. But even if there is an agent, hindi naman yung pupunta sa tao unless kagatin ka ng mosquito. So, the mosquito is the vector. It is the one that carries or transmits the agent to the host. So, yung nakikarry nung agent papunta kay host. Oh, kasama rin sa environment yung crowding and sanitation and even the availability of health services. Okay? So, when you get to your third year, you will encounter lots and lots of life cycles which look like this. So here, we can see that the human is the host. It is the one that develops the disease. And what is that agent that causes the disease? It is a tapeworm. It is a tapeworm that lives inside our small intestine. And the name of the tapeworm is T. saginata and T. solium. So we have the host, we have the agent. So, how does it enter our small intestine? This parasite enters our small intestine when we eat beef and pork. So the cow and the pig are the vectors. They are the ones who carry the parasite and introduces the parasite to man. Okay, malinaw po ba to? Are we all getting the drift? So now let's go to some technical terms before we go to the computations. Very important for epidemiology is the study of frequency and pattern. So when we say frequency, it is the number of health events or cases in relationship to the population. So basically, frequency is the number. Okay, so let's say, what is the frequency? Sorry. So let's say, what is the frequency of COVID-19 in Barangay Catalon? So basically, what we want to know is how many people has COVID-19? Parang ganon. And when we say pattern, it is the occurrence of health-related events or disease by time, by place, and by person. So, kung by time, pwedeng annual, seasonal, weekly, daily, hourly, or may mga diseases din na more common on weekdays compared to weekends. And in terms of place, pwedeng epidemic, local area lang, pandemic, international, or endemic, regularly occurring. Diba? So, epidemic, we've already studied this in the introduction. An epidemic is an occurrence of cases in excess of normal. Diba? It is a sudden increase in the number of cases of a certain disease. Now, epidemic can also be used interchangeably with outbreak. But an outbreak is usually an epidemic in a localized area. Okay, in a localized area. So, pwedeng in a barangay, in a certain street, in a subdivision. Yeah, pwedeng yun ang outbreak in a localized area only. So, ano bang mga causes ng epidemic natin? It can be due to an exposure of the community to a common source. Remember your cholera earlier? Kaya sila nagkaroon ng cholera kasi they all drank water from a common well. Diba? From a common source. So, pwedeng exposure of a community to a common source. Pwede rin na nakakaroon ng epidemic through host-to-host spread. Or we call it propagated. So, pwedeng one person will get the disease and then it will spread. Diba? That person will spread the disease to others. Such as in COVID. Diba? Isa lang magkaroon ng COVID in the family, lahat pwede nang magkaroon pag nag-spread siya. And then lastly, an epidemic can happen when there is a presence of a common source and propagation as well. So both. So when there is only one common source of infection, we call it a common source epidemic. So these are infections transmitted from one common source. So those who were not exposed to the common source will not get affected. So here is a news article which explains that. In July 4, 2019, an article was written. At least 242 supporters of former First Lady Imelda Marcos were hospitalized for alleged food poisoning after attending her 90th birthday in Pasig City. So may common source ng infection, yung birthday party ni Imelda Marcos. Those who did not attend that birthday party did not get sick. But those who attended and ate the food, they all got sick. Okay? We also have propagated epidemic. As mentioned, this comes from transmission from one infected person to another. No? Pwedeng direct or indirect. And the rise and fall in cases is more slowly compared to a common source. Pag common source kasi, sudden increase. Diba? Biglang taas. But in propagated epidemic, mas mabagal. So what do you mean by this? Let's take COVID as an example. Initially, we only had one case of COVID. Probably that initial case came from China. Umuwi ng Pilipinas. So siya lang. He did not know that he had COVID. So he went to his family. After a few days, some of his family members already started getting sick. Afterwards, their family members did not know that it was COVID-19, and so they went to their work. They went to school. They went to their jobs, diba? And so more people were getting infected. And these people who got infected will go home to their families as well and infect more people. So that is propagated epidemic, spreading it from one person to another. Pwedeng directly or indirectly. What do we mean by that? Like COVID, diba? When we say direct, when you spend time with that infected person, that is direct. Pero yung indirect, or let's say, I have COVID, and then I coughed, and then I touched my mouse, the mouse of my computer. So that mouse was borrowed by a friend, and that friend later on also got sick with COVID. So yun yung indirect route. You may not have had close contact, but through indirect ways, you can actually spread the infection. And this is another example, measles in 2019. No, October, pa isa-isa lang yung case. Pero by November, dumadami na. Until nung December, nag-peak na siya. Okay? Lastly, we have mixed epidemic. When we say mixed, it's a combination of common source and propagated. Yun lang naman. Of course, we also have a pandemic which extends to different countries and continents. And when we say endemic, this is an ongoing usual or constant presence of a disease in a community or group of people. So, an endemic disease in Leyte and Samar is schistosomiasis. And an endemic disease in the Philippines is tuberculosis. So, ibig sabihin, normal lang sa atin sa Pilipinas ang mga may TB. Sadly. So, if let's say there is an outbreak, an epidemic, pandemic, or even an endemic, what will we do? We will activate the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC. And what will they do? They will, number one, prepare for field work. They will go to the area where there is an outbreak. And they will establish the existence of an outbreak. They will count how many people has a disease. And they will determine if it's proper to label it as an outbreak or not. They will also have to verify the diagnosis because they might think it's dengue, yun pala hindi dengue. Diba? And then, this is where epidemiology enters. You define the cases. Who is most affected? Where are they most affected? What time are they most affected? Then you develop your programs and you implement your control measures. And then lastly, you communicate your findings to the WHO. So this is how an outbreak investigation is done. So let's take a 5-minute break before we continue to the vital statistics. Please prepare po your calculators and your scratch papers.